Hello, my beautifuls. I wanted to try a different style of filming while I get the hang of doing these video blogs. So today I'm going to talk about a topic that I talk a lot about and I can just sort of speak from the heart on it. Um, and that's the acronym FRIES. And in sex positive spaces, this is a way we teach people some really basic tenets of consent. Because a lot of times people just come into these spaces and the only thing they know is that no means no. Which isn't, I mean, it's true, but it's not necessarily the best way to understand consent because it's a lot more nuanced than that. So this acronym covers all the basics, and then when you get more involved in the community, or you get more involved in sex work, if that's what you're doing, you sort of can expand on this acronym to practice good consent. So the first part of the acronym F stands for freely given. Consent needs to be freely given, which sort of means two things. It means first there should be no coercion. There shouldn't be any people shouldn't have anything to gain from it. You're not going up to somebody and saying, "I'm going to give you $1,000,000 if you let me sleep with your wife." That's not good consent. You're not threatening to kick somebody out of their house if they don't have sex with you or offering it as an alternative to rent. That's not good consent either. The other part of it is that consent needs to be given without the influence of drugs or alcohol. And, I mean, a lot of us will have one or two glasses of wine before a hookup. Really just sort of know your limit and know other people's limit. If somebody's obviously inebriated, don't sleep with them. If you see somebody who's obviously inebriated being sexually harassed, you might want to help them out. See if they need some help. One thing that a lot of people don't really understand about drugs is that endorphins are a drug too. So as you're kissing and stuff is happening, you're building these endorphins, and your ability to consent is sort of going down, and you might make bad decisions based on endorphins. So it's really important to establish your barriers early, because as those endorphins are building and building, you're going to be less likely to want to establish those boundaries. The R stands for reversible. So just because somebody said that something is okay, they consented to something, they're allowed to say no at any time, and you gotta stop. And I mean, that's really simple. And just because somebody said yes in the past to something doesn't mean that they're going to say yes now. Consent is reversible, and if somebody says not tonight or stop, then it's not tonight or stop. It's as simple as that. The I stands for informed. You want to give people as much information as they can. Anything that might make them change their decision to consent is good information to give them. I usually like to give them the time of my last screening and what I was tested for, what the results were. I like to let them know about my partners, and I like to let them know that I'm polyamorous. I like to let them know about my safest sex procedures. I like to wear nitrile gloves, and I tell them that so that they're not weirded out when I put on nitrile gloves. I'd really suggest, if any of you are having digital sex, which is sex with your fingers, not sex on the computer, if you're having digital sex, you might want to think about using nitrile gloves, because so many infections are transmitted from our hands. Bacterial infections are transmitted from our hands a lot, because our fingernails are just so dirty. So gloves is a good thing. I like gloves. Yeah, and I let them know that I always wear condoms if I'm using my bits. So yeah, informed. Give them as much information as possible. Don't spring it on them too early, because that's like weird. Like, that might be sexual harassment. Like, you go on a blind date with somebody from Tinder and you're gonna tell them your safest sex procedures right away. that might be awkward. Let them know when sex is, more or less inevitable, when it's going to happen. And you could even like give them a timeout and say, "Oh, timeout. I have to tell you all this stuff before we do this, just to make sure we're both on board." Um, Give them as much information as possible. Any information that might change their mind, give it to them. Enthusiastic. To me, enthusiastic means that your partner is an active participant in it. Not everybody's enthusiastic. Some people handle sex weird, but they've got to be there. They have to be present. It's a team sport. Sex isn't something you do to somebody. It's something you do with somebody. So whether it's like they're taking off their clothes or they're kissing you, I mean, I like pillow princesses. I like to sleep with people who just lay there while I go down on them. But they're, you know, they've got to be a part of it too. They have to be present. They have to be, actively engaged in it. Um, so yeah, I mean, you can be the sort of person that likes to just lay down and let your partner do everything. But before it happens, you've got to be a part of it. You have to be present. You have to be there. And if it's weird and they seem to be zoning out, maybe give them a little check-in. Make sure you're still with me. The S in fries stands for specific. So just because somebody, invited you back to their hotel room to make out doesn't mean that they're gonna do anything else. Um, just because somebody, does one thing doesn't mean they're gonna do that other thing. If you want to change what you're doing, make sure you get consent. Make sure they're on board with it. I'm going to just touch on a couple of things that trip people up. The first thing is freely given. A lot of people say that sex workers can't consent because our consent isn't freely given, because people are giving us money to do sexy things. It's not really. I mean, it's true. Like, people are giving us money to do sexy things. But we also practice what's called occupational consent or transactional consent. And we've got ways we've developed to make sure that consent is something that we're in control of. And one of the things you hear a lot of escorts talking about is you're just paying for my time. And that, in conjunction with getting money up front, makes it so that we aren't being coerced with the payment at the end. We know we're getting the money, and if the guy's a total jerk, we can just walk away, and we've got his cash. And maybe some people might give him his money back, but I wouldn't. So I mean, that's just one of the ways. It's really difficult for sex workers to talk about the ways we practice occupational consent, because the more we talk about it, the more people try and find loopholes or ways to manipulate that. So I'm going to leave it at that for now. Maybe one day I'll make a more specific, more in-depth video about occupational consent and transactional consent that expands on it a lot, because I think talking about that is a really good way to take away some of the stigma and demystify it, and get people to understand that sex workers aren't always victims, that we do know what we're doing, and we've built ways to make sure that consent is always happening. Another thing I want to talk about is blanket consent, and people get tripped up with that because blanket consent is something that a lot of kinky couples practice, where they're like, they pre-negotiate this consent, and it's all done ahead of time, and it's like you can come up to me and do whatever you want to me at any time, and I can't say anything because we got blanket consent. It's not really something that I practice so much, especially since a lot of my kink is like doing sessions and working with people who are kind of like new at kink, people that just want to visit a dominatrix. But I do know a lot of people that do practice blanket consent, and my general understanding is that most people have like a safety valve. They have like a life sort of safe word. They do have ways to sort of put the brakes on it. And my understanding from doing some transformative justice work with people in the sex positive community is that when that is missing, quite often it's not actual like kink, it's abusive behavior masquerading as kink. So if, I mean, I'm not going to tell you how to practice blanket consent. Just make sure you know what you're doing when you get into it. And make sure it's reversible. I would say that's a good idea. But I mean, if you're a kinky couple, you hopefully you know more about consent than just fries. Hopefully you've gone to some workshops and stuff to do it. Hopefully this video went okay. I had no script at all. I was just improvising the whole time. Um, if you like this sort of content, make sure you hit like and subscribe. I'm not going to be putting videos out this frequently all the time, but I want to just sort of try a couple of different ways of making videos just to see what works. And if you want to support me, I'll link my Amazon wish list below. I'd really like to get some better production equipment. I need a new microphone to get rid of some of the background noise in my boudoir. And until next time, practice good consent and check out the fries acronym. I'll link an article down below. Bye!